I'd like to just make one other point about that. The accommodation industry is saying, why put this just on us when taxi drivers, cafes, restaurants, etc. are all benefiting? I want to make it very clear to the accommodation industry that they're not actually paying the levy. The visitor is paying the levy. They are being required to collect it. And we will work closely with the industry to make sure they are part of the design of the levy and also part of how we expend our marketing budget in attracting more tourists to the country. So I think they benefit in a whole lot of different ways. The second proposal is a targeted rate on new large-scale development. Under the unitary plan, we've set aside an area of land that's equivalent to the size of Hamilton and Greenfields development. It's over 11,000 hectares, but it is very expensive to provide the infrastructure to service that area to enable houses to be built. We are consenting far more houses than are actually being built, and one of the critical reasons for that is that a consent and a rezoning doesn't actually mean that you actually have the infrastructure to enable the building to occur. And when we can't afford to do that, we either delay the development, which means we do not provide the supply of houses to meet demand and house prices continue to go through the roof, or we have to put a general rates charge right across the Auckland community. And that means that the general ratepayers are paying for the infrastructure in the new areas. This proposal would enable us to raise the money to bring forward that infrastructure to create more houses, and it would be done by way of a payment, a targeted rate, on the new house purchaser, probably over a 20-year period. So it's not upfront lump sum, it is actually paid off over a period of time. It will add to the cost of the ratepayer in those new areas, but if we can keep the price of houses down, it will be a net benefit to the people purchasing those properties. The second way, before I get on to the second way of dealing with the need for infrastructure to build more houses, I just want to make it clear that the Productivity Commission, government and a whole lot of agencies have raised the problem of people having their land zoned but sitting on it and doing nothing with it. And this was raised by councillors around the table yesterday, because if the capital value of your land is really soaring, you don't need to develop it. You're making a lot of money by doing nothing with it, but you're also doing nothing to help solve our housing crisis. So this new targeted rate can actually discourage land banking, because developers would have to pay the rate as soon as the land is deemed developable, rather than sitting back and just watching the land values rise while being under no pressure to build the houses. The other aspect of dealing with infrastructure is the Housing Infrastructure Fund. You're aware of the government. It's got $1 billion that is made available. I supported that right from the time that it was introduced. I don't think it's big enough, but I think it would be very, very helpful. And council has just put together a proposal for a significant share of that to go into Auckland. If we got a significant share of that, that would enable us to bring forward the building of more than 30,000 houses over a period of time. That would also have a significant impact on the housing crisis in Auckland, and we'll be putting our case, no doubt, alongside other cities that will be making a case, but making the case on the basis that this is where the growth is happening, and for New Zealand to succeed, Auckland has to succeed. The next alternative source of revenue that I am raising, but which we do not on our own have the power to implement, relates to transport funding. I've indicated that I don't think that the interim transport levy is either sufficient, it clearly isn't, in terms of the money that it raises, but nor is it equitable. How can it be equitable? And I think it was your point, Mr. Chairman, that you raised very strongly in the past. How can it be equitable when a person on a minimum wage is paying the same levy as a major business, how can it be equitable when a pensioner not using the transport system or the roads much is paying the same as a person that's using the roads continuously? So how can we replace that particular levy? And my suggestion is the same one that I made throughout the election campaign. The quickest and cheapest to administer way of raising funding for roading and transport development would be through a regional petrol tax. If it was a 10 cents a litre tax, that would raise $150 million, nearly 3 times what the interim transport levy is raising. Now, that has to be negotiated with government. Government's starting position is that they don't particularly want it. I will be having discussions, including in the next 48 hours, with the Minister of Finance, the Prime Minister. I've already had interim discussions with the Minister of Transport, because I know that the government is acutely aware of the infrastructure deficit and the limited options available to this council to challenge that problem. They want us to work alongside them in funding. We can only do that if we have access to a source of funds that enable us to do something about the infrastructure deficit and to do something about increasing congestion. I want to finish off, Mr. Chairman, not quite finish off, but another couple of minutes, by saying it is also incumbent on this council to get its own house in order, which is why we will be in continuing the drive for efficiency in council funding. We do need to reduce costs. The mayoral office has led the way in finding those cuts to its budget, including in very personal ways, and we need to do that right across not only the council but the council-controlled organisations. So we will be looking at ways to do this, including things like whether our 800-strong vehicle fleet is much larger than it needs to be for council, including sharing services such as procurement over all of the council organisations, and by making sure that when we are purchasing services, we are getting the best deal we can in areas such as fundraising and insurance. Those savings need to come out of efficiencies. I think there is no council around this table that believes they should come out of cutting frontline services valued by the public. All of our spending must be evidence-based so that we can restore the trust and confidence of Aucklanders in our council. I want to just touch on a couple of the social pressures that we are facing in this city and how I intend to start to address those things. This council has already considered the question of a living wage. I believe, as a matter of principle, if a person puts an honest working week into their job, they should have a wage that enables them to live on in the city, which is a very expensive city to live in, particularly in relation to housing costs. I have committed myself to that during the campaign, and I understand that there is a cost associated. The cost is somewhere in the vicinity of $9 million. I believe that it needs to be a staged introduction over the triennium. I believe that we are simply anticipating what we will need to do anyway with the recent changes in pay equity. The majority of our lowest paid workers are women. I believe that we need to associate the living wage with an upskilling of the people. We have something like 400 library staff that are paid less than the living wage, and the council plans are to upskill those people as well as putting them onto a living wage. We are talking about 2,100 people who are currently below the living wage, and a further 1,200 who, as a consequence, would need to maintain some relativity because of supervisory and extra responsibility roles. I want to address also briefly the question of homelessness. I've started my dialogue with the major organisations providing relief to the homeless in our city. I've looked at what is happening overseas. If Vancouver were to be a model for us, we can anticipate a huge growth in homelessness in this city. We've already seen a huge growth. And when I walked from my office up to Radio New Zealand last week, I walked past 6 people sleeping on the streets, 6 people in the space of a couple of hundred metres. I don't think that is something that we can continue to tolerate without addressing this problem. We know the solution. It's called Housing First. We know that the government is ready to collaborate with us. Paula Bennett's fund of $3 million to address homelessness and to support Housing First. And what the NGOs are asking for council to do is to be the coordinating body to bring together the private sector, to bring together central and local government, and to bring together the vast number of community organisations with a worry and a concern about this problem. I'm asking for a relatively modest $500,000 to allow us to provide that coordination. There are, Mr Chairman, a number of other matters I'm not going to go into here that have been identified by officials as needing to be included in the report for consultation, but I just want to finish by saying what the themes of this proposal are. They are again about fairness, they are about stability, they're about collaboration, sharing the burden rather than placing the burden overwhelmingly on the ratepayer, creating stability through a responsible fiscal approach where rate rises are signalled well in advance and we stay within our debt cap, and collaborating with central government, businesses and the community to find solutions which will be enduring solutions for our city. So I ask today that you support this mayoral report so that we can work together in the best interests of Aucklanders and start an open and honest conversation to find solutions to the pressing challenges that our city faces. Thank you very much for your indulgence, Mr Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to clarify something said at the start, we have the meeting on the 13th, yes we do, but we also have a workshop on 8th of December.
Yes,
so
that's true.
Be aware of that, and then the local boards are coming in for a second forum/workshop on the 12th of December, so we have those 2 bodies of work, but especially the 8th of December where we can thrash this around much more, and if is there a will and a majority from the meeting to do additional items for consultation, that's where we will decide and then come back on the 12th and make that quite formal. I'm just going to say a few things because I had queries from a number of councillors over the last day or two, and I just want to clarify a couple of things, and it really just relates to page 2 under the recommendations. So just when it says there achieving rating stability, that's in reference to the past few years. It is also, we want to do it going forward, but it's in reference to the ups and downs of the last few years with rating, how we did start one day at the LTP at 2.5, then 3.5, and then it ended up 9.9. Those vicissitudes are not really sensible, and residents don't really like to see that sort of yo-yo effect going on. The implementation of a revenue strategy, that's looking at alternatives because quite clearly the Mayor's been quite clear on that, but there is regional fuel taxes, congestion charges, there are motorway tolls, there are a number of things that we will have to look at, and really it's going to be by and large driven by the government as to how cooperative and willing they are. When we are capping the general rates, just to be quite clear, at the 2.5, the LTP was 3.5, and then the LTP going forward is 3.5. And we had a presentation last week, I think it was, where we went through, and you could see the challenges that we are having to do just with that 1% that the mayoral proposal is committing us to, or proposing we commit to, is putting tremendous pressure on us, and we have to look at savings there. So we need to be quite clear and just emphasise again that if we hadn't worked with the pausing the long-term business differential for 1 year, the residents would have been paying 3% when it's a 2.5%. So the idea was to actually deliver that promise so that everyone got 2.5, and it couldn't be seen that residents were getting hoodwinked with a 3% rate rise on business benefiting to 1.6, so that is the reason for that. There was also been queries about the uniform annual charge and why does it go up by 2.5, but as you know, it always goes up by the general rate rise, and the reason for that is we try to preserve about 13.4% of the rate revenue take is funded by the uniform annual charge, so that's the reason why it always goes up by whatever the percentage. The interim transport levy, I mean, I'm not going to say anything. I've been the one making a case over the last couple of years to restructure that. I'm not going to make a case this term. I'll give notice on that because it's only got one more year to go, and given that we have paused the differential, but there's only one more year to go on it, and to be quite honest, it just doesn't seem worth the battle and upsetting business. And given that we're going to be looking at revenue streams that are going to tilt the balance to business paying a fairer and more equitable amount in the future, I'm not going to be doing anything about that personally, but I know there might be some other councillors may propose it. Councillor Casey.